She's the nurse. She doesn't belong here. That's what Preston Harrington said loud enough for the whole room to hear while Maya sat in a folding chair in the back, invisible, ignored, and already forgotten. But then the lawyer cleared his throat, turned the page, and said a name that made 20 people go completely silent. Her name. And everything that came after that silence, nobody in that room was ready for it. If you've ever been underestimated by someone who thought they already knew your worth, stay with me. Subscribe, hit the bell, and drop your city in the comments. I want to see how far this story reaches. She doesn't belong here. Preston Harrington didn't whisper it. He said it at a volume designed to be heard by his wife, by the cousins seated nearby, and most certainly by the woman in the folding chair at the back of the room. He said it the way men like him said things they wanted on the record, without technically being accountable for them. Casual, confident, disposable. Maya Linwood heard every word. She didn't flinch. She didn't look up. She sat with her hands folded in her lap and her eyes fixed on the mahogany desk at the front of the room. And she breathed the way she'd taught herself to breathe during the worst nights of the last 3 years, slowly through the nose, in through 4 counts, out through 4, steady and controlled, the way you breathe when you cannot afford to fall apart. She had parked outside for 4 minutes before coming in, had almost driven away. Almost. The letter had her full name on it, Maya Catherine Linwood. Not the caregiver, not the attending nurse. Her name. And below it, you are requested to be present at the reading of the last will and testament of Silas Jerome Harrington. She had read it 5 times at her kitchen table the morning it arrived, turning it over like it might say something different on the back. It never did. So she came. She wore the nicest blazer she owned, navy, slightly too large at the shoulders, bought 4 years ago, for her mother's funeral. She'd stood in front of the bathroom mirror that morning and told herself it looked professional. She had not fully believed herself. The receptionist at the front door had looked at her badge, then at her face and said, "Are you family? No." Press no. Then your relationship to the deceased? I was his nurse. 1 second of recalibration, the kind that didn't move the face but moved everything behind the face. Of course, last door on the left. Please don't be disruptive. Please don't be disruptive. Maya had walked down that hallway with those 4 words following her like something stuck to the bottom of her shoe. The drawing room held approximately 20 people, and not one of them acknowledged her arrival. She recognized them mostly from photographs, the silver frame kind Silas kept on the fireplace mantel in his study, the ones she'd dusted around for 3 years without ever being introduced to most of the people in them. There was Genevieve Silas's daughter-in-law in a black dress engineered to communicate grief while simultaneously communicating that she had excellent taste. There were cousins, financial people, a woman in the corner dabbing her eyes who Maya did not recognize at all. And there was Preston. He was exactly as she'd remembered from the 2 times she'd seen him in person, broad, silver-haired, expensive, in the way that required no announcement. He sat in the front row with one leg crossed over the other, radiating the specific ease of a man who had never in his life sat in a folding chair. It was Genevieve who spotted her first. She leaned toward her husband, said something behind her hand, and Preston turned and looked at Maya with the kind of slow, full-body assessment that rich people sometimes gave to things they were deciding whether to address or ignore. He chose to address it. "She doesn't belong here," he said, and the room without quite meaning to agreed. Maya breathed. In through 4, out through 4. She sat down in the folding chair near the back and waited. Elliot Whitmore, senior partner. Whitmore and Associates cleared his throat at exactly 9:30. "Thank you all for being here. Silas Harrington was a remarkable man, and I had the privilege of representing his interests for nearly 3 decades. What I'm about to read represents his final and legally binding wishes. I ask that everyone allow me to complete the reading before raising questions or comments." He looked up once briefly, and his gaze crossed the room in a slow arc. Pausing, Maya noticed for just a fraction of a second when it reached her before returning to the document. "Silas was very particular," Whitmore continued, "about the order of this reading." Preston uncrossed his leg, recrossed it the other way. The reading began a hospital foundation endowment, a university scholarship, a small bequest to a housekeeper named Donna, who was not present. Polite acknowledgments, reasonable nods, the sounds of people waiting, then the family. A trust for Preston's 3 children. Silas's grandchildren, accessible at 25. Expected. A property in Vermont to a cousin named Arthur who sat up very straight. Several smaller distributions. A car, a painting, a collection of books. Preston had not moved during any of it. His hands rested flat on his knees, the posture of controlled patience, Maya thought. Or the posture of someone performing controlled patience, and she watched his jaw work slightly, the way a jaw works when its owner is doing math. And now, Whitmore said, turning to a new page, the primary bequest. The room changed. It was the same room, same people, same air, but something in it shifted the way a held breath shifts the pressure in a space. Everyone leaned a fraction of an inch forward. Even the cousin in the corner with the handkerchief stopped dabbing. The remainder of my estate, including the Harrington family home and its full contents, the controlling interest in Harrington Industrial Holdings, the investment portfolio managed by Saxton Capital, all property holdings across 4 states, and all liquid assets registered under my name, I leave in their entirety. Whitmore paused. 1 second, maybe less. In that half second, Preston's hands opened on his knees, fingers spread, already reaching. To Maya Catherine Linwood. 3 seconds of absolute silence. Then Preston was on his feet. Not violently, he was too controlled for violence, at least the visible kind, but fast the way a man rises when the ground has been pulled from under him and his body reacts before his mind can stop it. That is a mistake, he said. His voice was level, barely. It is not, Whitmore said. My father was ill. He was not in a condition to make decisions of this magnitude. He was evaluated by 2 independent physicians, both of whom certified full cognitive competency at the time of signing. Whitmore had the tone of a man who had rehearsed for exactly this objection. The will was executed 8 months ago and has been reviewed, verified, and is legally unimpeachable. 8 months ago, he couldn't even... Preston stopped, pivoted. Who is she? That last question wasn't directed at Whitmore. He was looking at his wife, and Genevieve was looking at Maya. Everyone was looking at Maya. She stood up. Not because she'd planned to. Her body just made the decision the way your body makes certain decisions when sitting down no longer feels like an option. She stood up from the folding chair at the back of the room, the chair that had been set apart from all the others, the chair that had announced from the moment she'd sat in it that she was something less than a guest, and she stood straight, and she looked at the room that was looking at her. My name is Maya Linwood, she said. Her voice came out steadier than she felt steadier than she had any right to expect. I took care of Silas Harrington for 3 years. I was with him when he was frightened and when he was in pain and when he couldn't sleep and when he could. I was there on the days his own family wasn't. She let that sit for one breath, just one. And apparently he made a decision about that. Genevieve's face did something complicated. It started as disbelief moved through anger and arrived somewhere that wasn't quite either, something colder. She's the nurse, she said to the room as if clarifying a clerical error. She's just the nurse. Yes, Maya said, looking directly at her. I was, and your father-in-law is the one who called me something more. Preston walked toward her, slowly, deliberately. The walk of a man communicating that he was not rushing, not rattled, not anything he didn't choose to be. He stopped 4 feet away and looked at her with the careful, assessing look of someone who has dealt with the complications before and dealt with them successfully. Maya. First name, no miss, a choice. I understand this is a shock for you. Believe me, it's a shock for all of us. My father was a good man who spent his final years in a great deal of pain and loneliness, and in that kind of vulnerability, people form attachments, misunderstandings about what those attachments mean. He lowered his voice, intimate, almost kind. I don't think you are a bad person. I think my father confused gratitude with something else, and I think someone may have taken advantage of that confusion. The room was utterly still. Maya looked at him. She took her time. Mr. Harrington, she said, are you suggesting that I manipulated a dying man into rewriting his will? I'm suggesting that situations like this are complicated. Yes or no? A beat. I'm suggesting, Preston said carefully, that we should all take some time before drawing conclusions. That's not what you said 30 seconds ago. She tilted her head just slightly. 30 seconds ago, you said your father was confused and that someone may have taken advantage. I'm the only person in this room who wasn't family. So I'd like you to say clearly in front of the lawyer and everyone here whether you're accusing me of something. Because if you are, I'd like to know now. Preston's jaw tightened. Behind him, Arthur, the Vermont cousin, made a small sound. It might have been a cough. It might not have been. This isn't over, Preston said quietly. Mr. Whitmore, Maya said, not looking away from Preston, are we done here? They were not done. There were documents, timelines, formal process. She sat through all of it the same way she'd sat through 3 years of Harrington family visits, present, still attentive in ways no one recognized because they weren't looking for it. By the time the room cleared, Preston and Genevieve were the last to leave. At the door, Genevieve turned back once, just once, and then looked at Maya the way you look at something you are trying to memorize so you can defeat it later. Then she was gone. Whitmore waited until the sound of heels on marble faded completely. Miss Linwood? He extended his hand. I'm glad you came. He asked me to. He did. He reached into his jacket. He also left something separate from the will. A small white envelope, her name on the front in handwriting she knew the way you know a voice. He asked that you read it privately. She took it. Her fingers recognized the paper. What are the next steps, she asked. 60 to 90 days. Formal transfer process. She'd need counsel. In the interim, the estate would operate under existing management provisions. He explained it precisely, and she absorbed what she could and filed the rest under ask again later. One more thing, Whitmore said, his voice dropping half a register. Preston retained Breckenridge and Cole this morning. She looked at him. Before the reading, yes, she was quiet for a moment. That detail was not small. That detail meant Preston had known, done, or strongly suspected enough to arm himself before she'd even walked through the door. Then I need counsel today, she said. I'll make a call in the next hour. Thank you. She picked up her bag. Is there anything else? He hesitated, and Whitmore, she had already decided, was not a man who hesitated without reason. There's a file, he said. He asked me to give it to you specifically after the reading. It's labeled private, your name on it. He paused. He said you'd know what to do with it. I'm not certain that's true, but those were his words. She read the letter in her car. The handwriting was shakier than the early days pain had done that, in medication and time, but unmistakably his. The looped capitals, her name slanting slightly right as if it were leaning forward. Maya, if you're reading this, Elliot did his job and you did yours, which is to say you showed up. You always showed up, even when I didn't deserve it. I know you're scared or angry, probably both knowing you. The answer to why is in a file Elliot is holding labeled private, your name on the label. Ask for it today. Don't wait. What's in it explains something I should have told you 3 years ago. I was a coward about it, and I'm sorry. I thought I had more time. I always thought I had more time. Don't let Preston bully you. He's better at it than you know. But then again, so are you. S.H. She read it twice, folded it, pressed it against her sternum, and held it there. Then she started the car, drove back to the law office, and asked for the file. Whitmore set it on the desk, said nothing, and left the room. She opened it. 3 pages. Official. Dense type. At the top of the first page, 3 lines that her brain read, rejected, read again, and still could not fully absorb. Certificate of paternity, filed in accordance with state law. Father Silas Jerome Harrington. Child Maya Catherine Linwood. She sat completely still. Somewhere outside, the city continued. A phone rang, a door closed down the hall. A perfectly ordinary Monday afternoon moved through its ordinary minutes. Inside that office, Maya's entire life reorganized itself around 3 lines of type. Her father, Silas Harrington, who she had medicated and bathed and read to and argued with and held the hand of at 3 a.m, was her father. Had been her father every single day she had spent in that house. Had looked at her every single day, knowing what she didn't know. She turned the page. Underneath the certificate was a letter. Different paper, older the edges, slightly yellowed. Dated 12 years ago, addressed to someone named Catherine. Her mother's name was Catherine. She could not read it yet. Her hands had started shaking, a fine, deep tremor she felt in her wrists more than her fingers, and she pressed both palms flat on the desk and breathed. In through 4, out through four, in, out. She stood up, walked to the door, knocked. Whitmore appeared immediately, which told her he'd been close. Did you know, she said, that he was my father? Yes, how long? Since he arranged for you to be placed with him. He found you first, Miss Linwood. He made the call to the agency. He requested you specifically. His voice was precise, careful, carrying something that might have been an apology if it had anywhere to land. He wanted to know you. He couldn't think of another way that he believed you wouldn't. He stopped, started again. He was afraid. Of what? Of being rejected. A pause. By you. Maya looked at him for a long time. The family doesn't know, she said finally. No, it was not disclosed in the reading. That information is private unless you decide otherwise. She nodded once. Then for now, she said quietly, it stays that way. She walked out of the law office and into the afternoon with a file folder under one arm. 60 days of legal war ahead of her, the name Harrington burning quietly in her chest and the understanding slow enormous, and still arriving that the man she'd spent 3 years caring for had been taking care of her too. In the only way he'd known how, in the only way he'd been brave enough for. She got in her car, and this time she didn't sit in the parking lot. She put it in drive. She went home, and she sat at her kitchen table with the old letter, the one addressed to Catherine, her mother's name, and she finally carefully unfolded it and began to read. The letter was 4 pages long. Maya read it at her kitchen table with a cold cup of coffee beside her and the overhead light flickering the way it always did after 10 o'clock. And she read it the way you read something that keeps rearranging the floor beneath your feet, slowly then faster, then back to slowly because your eyes are moving ahead of your comprehension and you have to keep pulling yourself back to the beginning of sentences you thought you understood. Her mother's name was at the top. Catherine. Just that. No last name. As if Silas had known that one word was enough, that there was only one Catherine who mattered in the context of what he was about to confess. The letter began. I have started this letter 11 times. This is the 12th. I am going to finish it this time, even if it kills me, which at my age is not as dramatic a statement as it used to be. Maya almost laughed. Almost. She kept reading. The story was not complicated, which somehow made it worse. 34 years ago, Silas Harrington had met a young woman named Catherine Linwood at a hospital fundraiser. She was a volunteer. He was on the board. He was also at the time 6 years into a marriage that had become functional, the way a machine becomes functional, operational, efficient, and entirely without warmth. His wife Eleanor had not been cruel. She had simply been elsewhere emotionally in the way that people sometimes go elsewhere when they realize the life they're living is not the one they imagined and can't figure out how to grieve that without grieving it out loud. Catherine was 26. Silas was 41. They had talked for 3 hours at that fundraiser and then twice more over the following month, and then, and the letter used the word then, the way a door uses a hinge, one thing swinging into another, it became what it became. It lasted 8 months. It ended because Silas ended it, not because he wanted to. Because Eleanor found out, and because he was a coward, which was the word he used in the letter, coward, no softening, no justification, and because he chose the life he already had over the life that had surprised him. He didn't know about the pregnancy. He said that 4 times in 4 different ways as if repetition could function as proof. I did not know. She did not tell me. I found out only when, and even then, I wasn't certain until Maya tracked the sentences carefully and found the seam he had found out about her existence 14 years ago through a contact at a hospital where Catherine had once been treated. He'd had a private investigator confirm it. He had sat with that information for 2 years before doing anything at all. And then what he'd done was quiet, careful. He'd established a small, anonymous scholarship that had paid for the last year of Maya's nursing degree. He'd made sure through channels she'd never traced that her application to the placement agency was seen by the right people, and then he'd called the agency and requested her by name. Maya put the letter down. She pressed both fists against the table. Not hard, just pressed, feeling the solidity of it. He had known for 14 years. He had watched her, managed her from a distance, engineered their meeting, and then spent 3 years sitting across from her, talking to her, fighting with her about his blood pressure medication, letting her read him the news in the mornings because his eyes were going, and he liked her voice, and he had never once said, I know who you are. She picked up the letter again. The last paragraph was short. I don't ask your forgiveness, Catherine. I don't think I've earned the right to ask for it. I'm writing this because Maya deserves to know where she comes from, and because I am running out of time to be brave, and this is the only brave thing I have left. At the bottom, a postscript added in different ink, a different day. She could tell the pen pressed harder, as if the hand behind it was less steady. I love her. I should have said it to her face. I was afraid she'd leave. I was afraid every day that she'd find out and leave before I was ready. There is never a ready. I know that now. Maya sat with those words for a long time. Then she got up, poured the cold coffee down the drain, and went to bed. She did not sleep for a long time, but she went to bed, which felt like a necessary gesture toward the idea that tomorrow was still coming, and she would need to be functional for it. Tomorrow came. She was functional. Barely, but functional. The call from Whitmore came at 8:15 in the morning. I've spoken to Diana Reeves at Harmon Reeves and Park, he said without preamble, because he was the kind of man who understood that preamble was a courtesy, and sometimes courtesy was a luxury. She's reviewed the basic structure of the case, and she's prepared to take you on. She can meet this afternoon at 2. I'll be there, Maya said. One more thing. He paused. Preston filed this morning. Maya was quiet for a second. That was fast. He filed last night, actually, after business hours. His legal team must have drafted through the night. Another pause. He's contesting on the grounds of undue influence and diminished capacity, which means he's saying I manipulated Silas. That is the implication, yes. She breathed, in, out. And what does Diana Reeves think about our position, Vermont? She thinks it's strong, the competency evaluations are solid, the will is properly executed, and the timeline is clean. She'll explain the rest. He hesitated again. Maya, what's in that file, the paternity certificate, that information could significantly affect the case? A biological relationship to the deceased, it is not a small thing legally. I know. You'll need to discuss it with Diana. I know, she said again. I will. She hung up, stood in the middle of her kitchen in yesterday's socks, and said out loud to nobody, to the room, to the flickering overhead light. Okay, Silas, you really didn't make this easy. The light flickered. She chose to take that as an answer. Diana Reeves was 58 years old, wore her gray hair in a short, natural cut, and had the eyes of someone who had heard every version of every story and had stopped being surprised by any of them. She shook Maya's hand across the conference table with the grip of someone who had spent 30 years making sure people understood that she was not to be underestimated. Maya liked her immediately. Let's skip the pleasantries, Diana said, sitting down and opening a folder. You've had a significant 48 hours. I've read what Whitmore sent me. Tell me what he didn't send me. Maya told her, all of it. The certificate, the letter, the 14 years, the scholarship, the agency call. She laid it out the way she'd learned to give patient histories chronologically, factually, without editorializing, because the facts were strange enough on their own. Diana listened without interrupting. When Maya finished, Diana sat back and looked at the ceiling for a moment. You're his biological daughter, she said. Yes. And he engineered the caregiver placement specifically to bring you into his life. Yes. And no one else alive currently knows this. Whitmore knows. Besides Whitmore. Not that I'm aware of. Diana nodded slowly. This changes things. I assumed it would. It changes them in your favor significantly, but it also complicates them. She leaned forward. On one hand, a biological relationship to the deceased, confirmed by a filed paternity certificate, fundamentally dismantles the undue influence claim. You're not a predatory caregiver who manipulated a lonely old man. You're his daughter. Courts respond very differently to daughters. She tapped the folder. On the other hand, the moment this becomes public, and it will become public if we use it, Preston Harrington and every other member of that family will know that Silas had a secret child. The media will know, and we will need to be prepared for what comes after that. Maya thought about the letter, about I was a coward, about I love her. I should have said it to her face. Use it, she said. Diana looked at her steadily. You're certain. He kept it secret his whole life, and it cost both of us something. I'm not keeping it secret anymore. A beat. Then Diana nodded, once the nod of a woman who respected decisiveness. All right, Then we build from there. She picked up her pen. Now, tell me about Preston. Every interaction, every conversation, everything you observed in that house over 3 years. I want all of it. Maya talked for 2 hours. She talked about the Christmas visit where Preston had shaken her hand and wiped his palm on his trousers. She talked about the time Genevieve had sent back a meal tray Maya had prepared because it wasn't how the house staff should be presenting food. She talked about the quarterly visits where Preston would arrive, spend 90 minutes reviewing documents with Silas in the study, and leave, and how Silas's blood pressure would be elevated for hours afterward, and how Silas would sit very quietly after Preston left, looking at nothing until Maya brought him tea and asked carefully if he wanted to talk about it. He never did, but he always looked at her with something in his eyes that she hadn't had words for at the time, and now with the paternity certificate sitting in her bag, suspected she did. Did Preston ever threaten you directly? Diana asked. Yesterday at the reading. He implied I'd taken advantage of a vulnerable man. Implied or stated? Stated with diplomatic softening. He said my father Silas had confused gratitude with something else and that someone may have taken advantage of that confusion. Diana wrote something down. Good, we have that. Anyone else in the room heard it? About 18 people. Even better. She kept writing. He also retained counsel before the reading was finished, before technically there was anything to contest. Whitmore told me he retained them before the reading began. Diana looked up. So he knew what was coming. He suspected. How Maya had thought about that for approximately 16 hours. Silas must have told him something, or Preston found out through other means. He was always very involved in his father's business affairs, very invested in knowing what was happening. Did he have access to Silas's communications email phone? I don't know, but she stopped. Something surfaced. A memory she hadn't connected to anything until this moment. 3 months ago, about a month before Silas died, I came into the study and Preston was at the desk. He said he was looking for a pen. But the desk drawer, the small one on the right where Silas kept personal documents, it was open. And Preston doesn't use that drawer. I'd never seen him near it. Diana set her pen down. Did you mention that to anyone at the time? No, it didn't seem significant. It's significant now. She picked the pen back up. I'm going to need everything in writing. Dates, times, details as specific as you can make them. Can you do that? Yes. We're going to need it. Preston's team is very good. Breckenridge and Cole don't take weak cases, which means they believe they can win this. What they have that we don't is 30 years of institutional knowledge about how Silas's estate operated and who controlled what. What we have that they don't is the truth. She looked at Maya directly. And the truth in this case is significant. But Maya, I need you to understand something. Tell me. This is going to get ugly, very publicly, very quickly. Your personal history will be examined. Your mother's history, your finances, your professional record, your relationships. They will look for anything that can be used to suggest that you are someone who takes advantage of people. They will be thorough and they will not be kind. Maya met her eyes. I've been invisible my whole life, Ms. Reeves. I'm used to people not treating me kindly. Diana looked at her for a moment. Something in her expression shifted, not softened exactly, but recognized. No, she said quietly. I don't think you are used to it. I think you've survived it. Those are different things. Maya opened her mouth, closed it. Get me those written notes, Diana said, returning to her folder. I'll have a response motion filed by end of day Friday, and Maya, speak to no one about this. Not friends, not co-workers. No social media, nothing in writing that isn't through my office. Assume everything you say can be found. Understood. One last thing. Diana's voice shifted, still professional but quieter. Silas Harrington was your father, and whatever you feel about how he handled that, and you're entitled to feel whatever you feel, he also made sure in the end that you were protected. That counts for something. Maya picked up her bag. I'm still deciding how much, she said. She was in the elevator going down when her phone rang. Unknown number. She almost didn't answer. She answered. Miss Linwood, a man's voice. Smooth, formal, carrying the particular neutrality of someone trained to reveal nothing. My name is Richard Cole. I'm a senior partner at Breckenridge, and Cole representing the interests of Preston Harrington. Maya stopped moving. The elevator doors opened at the lobby. She stood inside it, not stepping out. "I'm going to have to refer you to my attorney," she said. "Of course, and we will reach out to her formally. But I wanted the opportunity to speak with you directly before this becomes something neither of us can pull back from." A pause. Boom. "Miss Linwood, my client is prepared to offer you a settlement. A significant one. An amount that would be, and I say this sincerely, genuinely life-changing for someone in your position." Someone in your position. There it was. "I have an attorney," Maya said. "Contact her. The offer won't improve once we're in litigation." "Then it won't improve." Her voice was flat, clean. "Don't call this number again." She hung up. The elevator doors had started to close while she was standing there, and she put her hand out to stop them, stepped into the lobby, and walked through the revolving door into the afternoon. Her hands were shaking again. The same fine, deep tremor as yesterday, the tremor she'd been learning in the last 48 hours, was not fear exactly, but rather the physical response to the continuous effort of holding herself together while everything she had known about her own life was being dismantled and rebuilt around her. She stopped on the sidewalk. People moved around her. She stood still. Someone in your position. She thought about the folding chair, about trying not to be disruptive, about Preston wiping his palm on his trousers after shaking her hand, about 3 years of entering that house through the side door because no one had ever thought to tell her she could use the front. She took out her phone, called Diana's office. "They called me directly," she said when the assistant connected her. "Richard Cole, settlement offer." A brief pause. Then Diana's voice replaced the assistant's. She'd clearly been handed the phone mid-stride. "What did you say?" "I told him to contact you and not to call me again." A beat. "Good." And then with something underneath the professional neutrality that might have been approval. "Very good." "There's something else," Maya said. "He said someone in your position. Twice, though." "They want you to feel small," Diana said. "That's intentional. That's strategy." "I know." Maya looked up at the sky, flat gray, the color of something thinking about raining. "It almost worked." "Almost is the word that matters." "Yes," Maya said. "It is." Damn. She went back to her apartment, made dinner. Real dinner, not the cereal at the counter kind she'd been eating since Monday because she had decided somewhere between the elevator and Diana's phone call that she was not going to stop feeding herself properly just because her entire life had been overturned. That felt important. That felt like a boundary she was drawing around herself. She ate. She wrote the notes Diana had asked for, 4 pages of them, small, careful handwriting, every detail she could remember. She sealed them in an envelope, and then she sat on the couch with the paternity certificate on the cushion beside her, and she looked at it and she thought about the line that had stopped her this morning when she'd read the letter for the second time. He chose the life he already had over the life that had surprised him. He had chosen the wrong life. And then years later, he had tried to correct for it in the only way he had left. Maya understood that. She didn't forgive it yet. Forgiveness felt like something that would require significantly more time and possibly a therapist, but she understood it. She had spent 3 years taking care of a man who was trying in the slow, quiet way of someone running out of runway to undo a choice he couldn't unmake. She just hadn't known what the choice was. She thought about what Diana had said. He made sure you were protected. That counts for something. She looked at the certificate. Silas Jerome Harrington. Father. She had never had a father. Her mother had never spoken of one, had offered when pressed only a calm and practiced deflection that Maya had eventually stopped pressing against. She had grown up believing her father was simply an absence, not a person, not a story, just a blank space in the shape of a man that nobody talked about. He had not been absent, he had been watching, badly and perfectly, from too great a distance, in ways that were more about his own fear than her actual needs, but watching. She didn't know how to hold that. She didn't know if what she felt was grief or anger, or something that wasn't either of those, something that required a word she hadn't found yet. What she knew was this: tomorrow morning, Diana Reeves was going to file a motion that would begin the process of confirming in the eyes of the law that Maya Catherine Linwood was the rightful heir to the Harrington estate. And when Preston Harrington found out the actual reason why, when the words certificate of paternity appeared in a legal document, With his father's name and her name side by side, the look on his face was going to be something she wanted to be present for. She turned off the light. She slept. And somewhere across the city, in a house that was technically already hers, Preston Harrington was on the phone with his lawyers, his voice low and controlled, and absolutely certain that he was going to win. He had never been more wrong about anything in his life. The motion landed on a Thursday. Diana filed it at 9:03 in the morning, and by 9:45, Maya's phone was ringing with a number she didn't recognize. Then another, then another. She let them all go to voicemail, sat at her kitchen table with her coffee, and waited for the one call she was expecting. Diana called at 10:15. "They know," she said. "How fast?" Breckenridge and Cole received the filing at 9:30. Richard Cole called my office at 9:37. "That's 7 minutes, Maya. 7 minutes to read a 30-page motion, locate the paternity certificate attachment, and pick up the phone, which tells you exactly how hard they were looking for it." Maya set down her coffee. "What did he say?" "He said, and I'm quoting directly, 'This is a fabrication and we will prove it.'" Then he hung up. Diana's voice was even, but underneath it was the particular tightness of someone containing something that wasn't quite satisfaction, but was adjacent to it. "I've already requested an expedited DNA verification hearing. Given that the original certificate was filed with the state, the burden of proof for fabrication sits entirely on them. They will need to demonstrate that a legally filed government document is fraudulent. That is not an easy thing to demonstrate." "Can they?" "No, but they'll try anyway because trying costs them nothing and buys them time." A pause. "How are you?" "Well, I'm fine, Sarah. Maya. "I'm functioning," sorry, demanded. "That's the honest answer." "It's a good enough answer for today." Diana's voice shifted slightly. "I need you to be prepared for something. This filing is public record. The paternity information is in the motion. By this afternoon, there's a reasonable chance someone from the press has it." Maya looked at the wall. "How long do I have?" "Hours, maybe less. I'd suggest you speak to anyone in your personal life who should hear this from you before they read it somewhere else." She thought about the short list that was. Her coworker Janelle, who'd covered her shifts for the past week without asking too many questions. Her downstairs neighbor, Mr. Okafor, who brought her soup when she was sick and whose opinion somehow mattered to her. A handful of other nurses she was friendly with, but not close to. Her mother was gone. She had no siblings, no father, or rather, she'd had one, and he was gone too in a different kind of way. "Okay," she said. "Thank you, Diana. Stay off social media. Don't comment to anyone who identifies themselves as press. Call me if anything happens. Define anything. If someone shows up at your door who isn't delivering food, if Preston Harrington or any member of his family contacts you directly, if you feel unsafe at any point." A beat. "I mean that last one seriously." Maya paused. "You think they'd..." "I think Preston Harrington is a man who has just discovered that his father had a secret daughter who was about to inherit everything he believed was his. I think people in that situation make decisions they wouldn't otherwise make." Her voice was careful, precise. "Just call me." The press found her by 2 in the afternoon. Not at her door, not yet, but on her phone through a number she'd had for 11 years that she'd never thought to make private. A reporter from a financial news outlet, professional and polite in the way that reporters are professional and polite when they want something from you. She said no comment and hung up. Called Diana, changed her phone settings, sat back down. Then her supervisor called. Carol Hendricks had run the nursing placement agency for 22 years and had the particular calm of someone who had seen everything twice. She did not lead with pleasantries. "Maya, I'm seeing something in the news about the Harrington estate. I was going to call you today. Is it true about Silas Harrington being?" "Yes." A long pause, long enough that Maya heard Carol exhale slowly on the other end. "Okay," Carol said. "Okay, are you all right?" "I'm managing. Do you need time?" "I need to keep working," Maya said, and she meant it not from financial necessity, though that wasn't irrelevant, but because the structure of work, the concrete reality of it, felt like the only solid ground she currently had. "I need to not sit in my apartment watching this happen to me." "Then come in," Carol said immediately. "Same schedule. You're mine until the court says otherwise, and maybe after too." She paused. "For what it's worth, I placed you with Silas Harrington 3 years ago, And I've never once had a complaint about your care. Not from him, not from anyone. Whatever they say about you in this, I know what kind of nurse you are. Maya pressed her lips together, held it together. Thank you, Carol. Don't thank me. Come in Thursday. Mr. Delgado in 4B needs his medication review, and he only cooperates with you. Maya almost laughed. That almost laugh felt like a small survival. The first headline appeared at 4:17 p.m. She saw it because Janelle texted her a screenshot with no caption, just 3 question marks. The headline read, "Secret Daughter or Calculated Con? The Harrington will controversy just got complicated." Below it, a paragraph that used phrases like unverified claims, an alleged biological relationship, and sources close to the Harrington family question the authenticity. Sources close to the Harrington family. Preston had already been talking. She called Diana. "I see it," Diana said before Maya got a word out. "Don't read the comments." "I wasn't going to." "You were going to, don't." A sound of papers moving. Preston is running a media strategy alongside the legal one. That's expensive, and it means he's worried. Worried people make mistakes. Let him talk. "He's calling me a con artist. He's implying it through anonymous sourcing, which is meaningfully different and significantly more cowardly. We'll address it." A pause. "Maya, I need you to do something difficult." "What?" "Nothing. Absolutely nothing. No statements, no responses, no visible reaction. The best thing you can do right now is be completely unremarkable for the next 72 hours while we let the legal process do the work. Be completely unremarkable." Maya thought with a dark edge of something that wasn't quite humor that she had spent most of her life being completely unremarkable. It was at least a skill she'd had practice in. "All right," she said. She put the phone down. She didn't read the comments. She made dinner. She went to bed. She did not sleep. The DNA hearing was set for 12 days out. In those 12 days, several things happened in rapid succession, each one landing before she'd fully processed the last. Preston gave an interview to a financial publication, carefully worded, attorney-reviewed, dripping, with the specific sadness of a man being wronged, in which he described his father as a brilliant man in severe physical decline, surrounded in his final months by someone who had every incentive to exploit that decline. He did not name Maya directly. He didn't need to. The nursing board sent a courtesy inquiry, not a formal complaint, not yet, but the kind of letter that begins with "We've become aware" and ends with "We trust this will be resolved promptly," and exists in the space between reassurance and warning. Carol handled it. Diana sent a letter in response. Maya wrote a 4-page factual account of her entire tenure with Silas that Diana reviewed word by word before submission. A woman named Deborah Paulson, a distant cousin of Silas's. Someone Maya had never met, called Diana's office to say that she was prepared to testify that Silas had mentioned Maya in affectionate terms that were unusual for a patient-caregiver relationship. Diana thanked her and added her to the witness list. And 3 days before the hearing, Genevieve Harrington appeared at Maya's apartment building. Not at her door, she was intercepted in the lobby by Mr. Okafor, who happened to be coming in with groceries at the exact moment Genevieve arrived, and who, when asked if he knew which unit Maya Linwood was in, had said never heard of her, with the serene conviction of a man who had decided on the spot to be unhelpful. Maya found out because Mr. Okafor knocked on her door 5 minutes later, handed her a container of jollof rice she hadn't asked for, and said, "Beautiful woman, very expensive shoes, wanted to find you. I told her I did not know you. The rice is from yesterday, still good." Maya had stood in her doorway holding the container and felt for the first time in 2 weeks something that was unambiguously warm. "Thank you, Mr. Okafor." "Whatever is happening," he said pleasantly. "It seems serious. Eat the rice." She ate the rice. Then she called Diana and told her about Genevieve. "She came to your home," Diana said. The pleasant professional neutrality was gone. What replaced it was quieter and considerably sharper. "Did she make contact?" "No, my neighbor intercepted her. I'm sending a letter to Breckenridge and Cole today. If any member of the Harrington family makes direct contact with you again, we file a harassment motion. That is not a warning I give lightly." A pause. "What do you think she wanted?" "I don't know." Maya thought about it. Genevieve she's strategic. She doesn't do things without a reason. She wouldn't have come herself unless she thought there was something to gain that Preston couldn't get through the lawyers. Like what? I don't know, Maya said again. But she did wonder, and the wondering sat with her quietly persistently through the rest of that afternoon and into the night. The morning of the DNA hearing, Maya wore the navy blazer again. She did it deliberately. The same blazer from her mother's funeral. The same one she'd worn to the will reading, slightly too large at the shoulders, bought for grief and worn now for something else. She stood in front of the bathroom mirror, and this time she believed without reservation that it looked professional. She met Diana outside the courthouse at 8:45. Diana looked at her once top to bottom and nodded. Ready? Yes, Maya said, and she was surprised to find that she meant it. Inside the courthouse, in a wood-paneled hearing room, Preston Harrington sat at a table across the aisle with Richard Cole and two associates. He was in charcoal gray, expensive pressed the color of authority. He looked at Maya when she walked in, the way he'd looked at her at the will reading the slow inventory, the assessment, the silent conclusions. This time she looked back. She held his gaze for exactly long enough that looking away would have meant something, and then she turned to her own table and sat down. Diana opened her folder. How's your breathing? She murmured. 4 counts in, 4 counts out. Good. The hearing was not dramatic in the way that courtroom scenes are dramatic on television. It was procedural, careful, dense with language that Maya tracked with effort. The judge, a woman named Constance Parks, 60s, with the bearing of someone who had been the smartest person in every room she'd ever entered and had long since stopped being interested in proving, it reviewed the motion, the certificate, Diana's attached documentation. Richard Cole argued that the paternity certificate had been filed retroactively under unclear circumstances and that the chain of documentation was insufficiently verified. Diana countered that the certificate had been filed with the state 12 years prior, predating Maya's placement with Silas by 9 years, which made manipulation of that document for inheritance purposes not only implausible, but temporally impossible. Judge Park asked 3 questions, precise, devastating in their precision, each one targeted at the weakest point of Cole's argument. Cole answered the first 2 smoothly. The third one about the specific state records that would need to have been falsified for the certificate to be fraudulent, and whether his client was prepared to allege criminal fraud by a state government office, he answered less smoothly. The judge ordered a DNA verification, standard protocol for a contested paternity claim. Both parties were to submit samples, results in 10 days. When she said it, Preston's jaw moved in the way she'd seen it move at the will reading, that small tectonic shift. Barely visible, he knew what the DNA would show. His lawyers knew. Everyone in that room who was paying attention knew. He had just lost the first round. Maya was outside the courthouse waiting for Diana to finish a phone call when she heard his voice behind her. Maya. She turned. Preston was alone. Cole was still inside apparently, and without the surrounding architecture of lawyers and family and formal settings, he looked different. Not smaller exactly, but more human. The silver hair, the good suit, the broad shoulders, all of it still there. But his face was doing something she hadn't seen it do before. He looked tired. You don't have to run the story about being his daughter, he said. You've already won the legal argument. The DNA will confirm it, we both know that. But you could keep it private, handle the transfer quietly, take what he left you, and that could be the end of it. Maya looked at him. Why would I do that? Because my children, he said, and his voice dropped in a way that was uncontrolled, and she recognized it immediately. It was the voice of someone who has been holding something very heavy for a very long time. My children have nothing to do with this. My father's choices have nothing to do with them. And if this becomes a public story about Silas Harrington and a secret daughter, they're going to grow up reading about their grandfather in a way that... He stopped, pressed his mouth together, started again. They're 12, 9, and 7. My kids. Maya was quiet for a moment. She thought about the grandchildren's trust, the money Silas had set aside for them untouched by the primary bequest. Silas had protected them too, in his way. I'm not trying to hurt your children, she said. Then don't. I'm also not going to hide who I am, she said. I spent 34 years not knowing who I was. I am not going back to that. She held his gaze. Your children will be fine, Preston. They have a trust. They have two parents. They have a last name that opens doors. She paused. I had none of those things, and I managed. He looked at her for a long moment. Something moved through his expression that she couldn't name, not quite anger, not quite grief, something in the space between them. He should have told you, Preston said. Whatever else he should have told you. It was so unexpected that for a second she didn't respond. It was the first thing he had said to her that didn't have a strategy behind it, the first thing that landed like something real. Yes, she said quietly, he should have. Preston nodded once. Then Cole appeared at the courthouse doors behind him, and Preston's expression reassembled itself. The control coming back, the professional neutrality sliding back into place like a visor going down. This isn't over, he said, but this time it didn't sound like a threat. It sounded like a man reminding himself of something he was less certain of than he had been. He walked back to his lawyer. Maya watched him go. Diana appeared at her shoulder. What was that? He asked me to keep the paternity information private. Diana's eyebrows went up. What did you say? No. She paused. But I understand why he asked. Diana studied her for a moment. Don't let understanding someone make you protect them. Those are different things. I know, Maya said. Believe me, I know. The DNA results came back in 9 days. Diana called at 7 in the morning, and Maya knew from the first syllable the particular steadiness of it, the absence of preamble, that it was confirmed. 99.98% probability of biological paternity, Diana said. It's over legally. Cole will know within the hour. I expect a call from them by noon. Maya sat on the edge of her bed. Outside, someone's car alarm was going off 2 blocks away, the ordinary, irritating sounds of an ordinary morning. It's real, she said. Not to Diana, more to herself. It has always been real, Diana said gently. Now the law agrees. Cole called Diana at 11:43. He was brief, professional. He asked whether Maya would consider a structured settlement in lieu of a full contested transfer. Diana said she would present the offer to her client. Diana called Maya and presented the offer. Maya listened to the numbers, which were significant, genuinely significant, the kind of numbers that would have changed her life comprehensively 6 months ago, and she sat with them for exactly 30 seconds. No, she said, full transfer. Full transfer. Everything Silas left me. That's what he wanted. That's what I want. A beat. All right, Diana said. And then, he would have liked you, I think, as a lawyer. He already liked me, Maya said. He was my father. She said it without planning to the words arriving already formed, already comfortable in her mouth, in a way they hadn't been 2 weeks ago. She sat with the surprise of that for a moment after she hung up. He was my father. She had said it out loud. It had not broken her. It had not felt like a law or an intrusion or something borrowed from someone else's story. It had felt like something clicking into place, something she hadn't known was missing until the moment it wasn't. 4 days later, Diana called with the date. The formal transfer was scheduled. 60 days from the original will reading, as Whitmore had outlined. The Harrington estate, the house, the holdings, the investments, the accounts would pass into Maya's name on a Tuesday in early spring. Preston had withdrawn the contest. Not gracefully. There was no graceful version of withdrawing a contest that had been built on the premise that the other person was a fraud. Once evidence confirms they are not a fraud. But he withdrew it. Formally, legally, completely. Genevieve, according to a source that Diana declined to identify, had not spoken to Preston for 3 days after he told her. That information arrived to Maya secondhand, and she held it with something that was not satisfaction, not quite. Closer to the understanding that consequences, when they finally arrive, have their own weight and their own speed, and they don't ask permission. Maya went to work on Thursday. Mr. Delgado in 4B had his medication review. He complained about his blood pressure reading, and Maya told him the reading was accurate, and the complaint was not going to change it, and he told her she was stubborn, and she told him that was rich coming from him, and he laughed, the short, reluctant laugh of a man who doesn't want to be charmed but is, and she wrote her notes and moved to the next patient. At lunch, she sat in the break room with Janelle, who had been carefully not asking questions for 2 weeks and had clearly run out of patience. Okay, Janelle said, putting down her sandwich. Tell me everything. You've read the headlines. I've read the headlines. I want to hear it from you. She leaned forward. You're really his daughter. I'm really his daughter. Janelle stared at her for 3 full seconds. Maya, that man had you changing his sheets. I know. And he knew the whole time. The whole time. Janelle sat back. Okay, she said, okay. So how do you feel, honestly? Maya thought about that, about the letter on her kitchen table, about the flickering overhead light, about Preston's face outside the courthouse, tired and human, and for one unguarded moment, something close to honest. About Silas at 3 a.m, scared and not saying why, and her sitting with him anyway without knowing the reason. I feel like I've been living inside a story I didn't know I was in, she said finally. And now I know. And now I have to figure out what the next chapter looks like. You're going to move into the house, Janelle asked. Maya looked at her. It's my house, she said, and that even now, even after all of it, was still the most astonishing sentence she had ever said. She moved in on a Tuesday. Not with movers, not with fanfare, with her car, 3 trips, and Janelle in the passenger seat asking questions Maya didn't have answers to yet. 2 suitcases. A box of books, her coffee maker, and the file folder with the paternity certificate and the letter which she had not left in the apartment for a single night since the day Whitmore handed it to her. The estate manager, a composed man named Gerald, who had run the house's operations for 11 years, was waiting at the front door when she pulled up. Not the side door, the front door. She noticed that immediately, the way you notice something that should have always been true, finally being true. Miss Linwood, Gerald said, extending his hand. Welcome. She shook it. Thank you, Gerald. Please call me Maya. He considered that for half a second. Of course, he said, and stepped aside to let her in. Janelle, carrying the coffee maker, leaned close and whispered, That man has more composure than anyone I've ever met in my life. He worked for Silas for 11 years, Maya said. Composure was probably a job requirement. Gerald showed her the rooms. She had been in this house hundreds of times. She knew where the light switches were. She knew which drawer in the kitchen stuck. She knew that the 3rd step on the main staircase creaked in a specific way that sounded like it was saying, careful, but she had never moved through it like this. Never moved through it as someone who belonged to it rather than someone who was there to serve it. The study was the hardest room. She stood in the doorway for a moment without going in. Gerald noticed, she was certain Gerald noticed everything, but he said nothing and moved quietly to the next item on his mental list. Janelle came to stand beside her. You okay? This is where he used to sit, Maya said, in the mornings. Before his eyes got too bad to read, he'd go through the news before I even got here. I'd come in and he'd already have opinions about everything. She paused. He had opinions about everything. All the time. Very annoying. You miss him. I'm furious at him, Maya said, which is different. It's not really different, Janelle said. Sometimes it's the same thing. Maya looked at the desk, the chair, the small right-hand drawer that she now knew meant something it hadn't meant before. Yeah, she said quietly. Sometimes it is. The first board meeting was in 6 days. Diana had prepared her. Whitmore had prepared her. Gerald had prepared her in his own way by leaving a neatly organized binder on the desk in the study that covered the essential structures of Harrington Industrial Holdings, its current executive team, its recent performance, and its 3 most pressing operational decisions. She read it twice. Then she called Diana. The board doesn't have to accept me, Maya said. Correct. The board is not obligated to follow the majority shareholder's preferences on operational decisions. But the majority shareholder does have significant influence over board composition, executive compensation approval, and strategic direction. They know that. You need to walk in there knowing that too. How many of them are aligned with Preston? A pause. Whitmore believes 4 of the 9 are historically Preston's people. 2 are genuinely neutral. 3 were close to Silas personally and are likely to be sympathetic to you. She paused. Likely. Likely isn't certain. In boardrooms, nothing is certain, but you have something Preston doesn't. What? You're Silas's daughter, and Silas built that company. That counts with the people who are actually loyal to him rather than loyal to the next available power. Diana let that settle. Dress well, speak less than you think you need to, and when you do speak, be specific. Boardrooms distrust emotion and respect precision. I'm a nurse, Maya said. I've been giving precise information to people under pressure for 15 years. Then you're more prepared than you think, Diana said, which is usually the case. Wow. She spent the next 6 days in the study. Gerald brought her coffee without being asked, which she appreciated. She read through financials, meeting minutes, executive reports. She found buried in a quarterly report from 2 years ago a notation she didn't understand, a subsidiary company listed under a holding structure she couldn't immediately trace, with an operating loss that had been marked as under review for 6 consecutive quarters without resolution. She put a tab on that page. She found 2 more similar notations. Different subsidiaries, same pattern flag labeled under review, never resolved. She called Whitmore. These 3 items, she said, the review notation on the subsidiary operating losses. Who was managing the review process? A brief pause. Preston sat on the internal audit subcommittee. Maya set down her pen. For how long? Since Silas's health began to decline, approximately 4 years. And these losses have been under review for 3 of those 4 years. Yes, his voice was careful. I noticed that as well. I was waiting to see if you would. Were you planning to tell me? I was planning to see how long it took you to ask. A pause. I apologize if that seems strategic. I've found that people understand the things they discover themselves better than the things they're told. You'll defend what you found. You might not fight for what I handed you. Maya thought about that. You've been doing this a long time. 30 years, he said. Long enough to know who's ready and how to tell. What do I do with this? Bring it to the board meeting. Don't accuse, ask questions. Let the questions do the work. And if Preston is stealing from the company, the word landed in the silence between them. Whitmore did not dispute it, which was its own answer. Then the board will need to address that, he said, and that will be significantly more complicated than a will contest. She sat with that for a long moment. He was stealing while his father was dying. We don't know that definitively yet, but you suspect it. I have suspected it, Whitmore said quietly, for approximately 18 months. I did not have standing to act. You do. The night before the board meeting, she couldn't sleep again. She sat in the study in the dark, not the aggressive dark of someone torturing themselves, but the quiet dark of someone thinking. And she thought about Silas, about the quarterly visits from Preston, about the elevated blood pressure, about the way Silas would sit very still after Preston left, looking at nothing. He had known. She was almost certain of it. He had known or suspected and had been too tired and too sick and too heartbroken to do anything about it himself. And he had left it for her. Not just the estate, not just the name, but this too. The unfinished business. The thing that needed to be addressed by someone with both the standing and the will to address it. She thought about his letter. Take care of what I've left you. She had assumed that meant the house, the money, the responsibility of a name. She was beginning to think he meant something larger. She turned on the desk lamp, opened the binder to the tabbed pages, and read them again. By midnight, she had written 6 precise questions, each one designed to locate, without telegraphing, the destination exactly where the money had gone. She turned off the lamp and went to sleep at 12:43. For the first time in 3 weeks, she slept the whole night through. The board meeting was at 10. She arrived at 9:50. Gerald drove her. She hadn't asked him to, but he had appeared at 8:30 with the pin in a look that communicated that this was not optional. And she walked into the Harrington Industrial Holdings offices for the first time in her life with her 6 questions in a folder and Silas's binder under her arm. The boardroom held 9 people plus her. 4 of them she identified immediately as Preston's people, not because they looked hostile, but because they looked careful in the specific way of people who have already decided their position and are managing their expression around it. 3 others had the warmth of people who had genuinely liked Silas. One of them, a woman named Barbara Cho, had been at the will reading and had nodded at Maya across the room in a way that had felt at the time like a small kindness. It still felt like that. 2 were genuinely unreadable. Preston was not in the room. That surprised her, and then it didn't. He had resigned from the board 4 days ago. Diana had told her, but it hadn't fully landed until this moment. The chair where he had presumably sat for years was simply empty, and no one was drawing attention to it. The acting chair, a man named Howard Birch, who had the careful energy of someone navigating a minefield, and very much wishing he was elsewhere, called the meeting to order. We want to start by welcoming Maya Linwood as the majority shareholder and rightful heir to Silas Harrington's estate, he said. This is an unusual circumstance for all of us, and I think I speak for the board when I say we're committed to an orderly transition. He looked at her when he said it. She looked back steadily. Orderly transition meant different things to different people in this room, and they both knew that. Thank you, she said. I'm glad to be here. I have a few questions before we move to the agenda if the board is agreeable. Howard nodded, the careful nod of someone who had no choice. The 3 subsidiaries listed in the Q3 audit report from 2 years ago, Maya said. Meridian Logistics Clearwater Facilities and the Harrington Properties Subtrust. She opened the binder, placed it flat on the table so the tabs were visible. All 3 have carried an under-review notation on operating losses for 3 consecutive years. I'd like to understand the current status of those reviews. Silence. Not the held breath silence of the will reading, this was a different kind of silence. The silence of 9 people recalibrating simultaneously like a ship crew, realizing the person they assumed was a passenger, just sat down at the navigation console. Barbara Cho, 3 seats to Maya's left, leaned forward almost imperceptibly. Howard Birch said, "Those reviews have been ongoing." "I understand they've been ongoing," Maya said, "for 3 years. I'd like to know who's been conducting them, what the current findings are, and why 3 years has not been sufficient to reach a conclusion." One of Preston's people, a man named Dale, she'd been told, who had been on the board for 7 years, and who had the particular aggression of someone used to being the most prepared person in the room, said, "Those are operational matters that typically wouldn't be raised at a general board meeting." "This is a shareholder meeting," Maya said. "I'm the majority shareholder. Where would you suggest I raise them?" Dale opened his mouth, closed it. Barbara Cho made a small sound that was definitely not a cough. "I'd like the review files," Maya said. "All 3, on my desk by end of week. I'm also requesting the full audit subcommittee records for the past 4 years. She looked at Howard. "Is that going to be a problem?" Howard looked at Dale. Dale looked at the table. "No," Howard said. "That's not a problem, ma'am." The meeting lasted 2 hours. By the end of it, 3 things had happened that Maya had expected and one that she hadn't. She had expected the polite resistance from Dale and his 2 allies, the procedural objections, the gentle suggestions that certain decisions required more time, the barely concealed reluctance that was the boardroom equivalent of a door being held mostly closed. She had expected Barbara Cho's support, direct, concrete, delivered without apology. When Maya raised the question of an independent audit firm to review the 3 subsidiaries, Barbara had seconded the motion before Maya had finished the sentence. She had expected the 2 unreadable board members to remain unreadable, and they had, though, one of them, a man named Thomas, who looked to be in his late 60s, and who had said almost nothing for the entire meeting, had caught her eye as she stood to leave and nodded. Once. The kind of nod that communicated something without committing to what. What she hadn't expected was the envelope. It was on the passenger seat of Gerald's car when he drove her back to the house. A plain white envelope with her name on the front. No return address. Gerald said it had been left with the building's front desk with instructions for delivery. That was all he knew, or all he said he knew, which with Gerald might have been the same thing. She opened it in the car. Inside was a single sheet of paper, typed, not handwritten, no signature. The Meridian Logistics accounts were closed and the funds redirected 18 months ago. The documentation in the official audit file has been altered. The original records are in a storage unit in the name of Harrington Properties, LLC Unit 14, Eastside Storage, River Street. The key was in your father's desk drawer, the small one on the right. She read it twice. Then she said, "Gerald, take me back to the house." "Of course," Gerald said, not surprised, not asking questions, just driving. The key was in the small drawer on the right. She found it in 30 seconds. Small silver, numbered, the kind of key that opened a padlock rather than a door. She had cleaned that drawer a dozen times over 3 years. She had seen that key and assumed it was for something unremarkable, the way you assume everything unremarkable when unremarkable is all you're looking for. She called Diana from the study. "Someone left me an envelope," she said and read it out loud. Diana was quiet for 4 full seconds. "Who knows you were at that meeting today?" "Everyone on the board. Gerald, you, Whitmore. Someone in that building left that envelope. which means someone in that building knows where those records are and wants you to find them. A pause. This could be a trap. Or it could be someone who's been waiting for someone with standing to do something about this. Yes, Diana said. It could be both. I have the key. Maya. I have the key, Diana. It was in his drawer. She held it up as if Diana could see it. He left me the key. He knew it was there. A long pause. Don't go alone. I wasn't planning to. Take Gerald and call me the moment you have eyes on whatever is in that unit. Gerald drove without comment. The storage facility was 12 minutes from the house. Unit 14 was at the end of a ground floor row, padlocked with the kind of heavy-duty lock that meant someone had cared about what was inside. The key fit on the first try. Inside were 12 banker's boxes neatly stacked, each one labeled in a handwriting she didn't recognize and dated across the past 4 years. She opened the top box on the nearest stack. Financial records, ledgers, transaction logs. She was not an accountant, she knew her limits, but she had spent enough time with Diana's documents and Silas's binder in the past 3 weeks to recognize what she was looking at. Transfers. Consistent, regular routed through the Meridian Logistics account to an LLC she hadn't seen in any of the official documents. An LLC whose name she photographed along with every other relevant page standing in that storage unit with her phone for 40 minutes while Gerald stood at the entrance and watched the door. When she finally came out, she called Diana. I'm sending you photographs, she said. 63 of them. I need you to get them to a forensic accountant today. What did you find? I don't know exactly, but I think it's everything. She looked at the padlock in her hand. I think Silas knew. I think he kept these records himself. And I think that's why he left me the key. Diana was quiet for a moment. He was protecting the evidence. He couldn't act on it. He was sick and dying, and the person doing it was his son. She felt the weight of that, how enormous it was, what it would have cost Silas to hold that knowledge through his last months. So he kept the records, and he gave the key to the only person he trusted to know what to do with them. He gave the key to you, Diana said. He gave the estate to his daughter, Maya said, and he gave the key to his nurse. I think he understood that both of those things needed to be the same person. The forensic accountant's preliminary report came back in 11 days. Diana called at 7 in the morning. Maya was already awake, already sitting in the study with coffee, because she had learned in the past month that her body now woke before the important calls came, some internal alarm she hadn't had before tuned to frequencies of consequence. $4.3 million, Diana said. Redirected over 31 months through the Meridian Logistics subsidiary into a holding company registered in Delaware. The holding company is owned by a trust. The trust's beneficiary is listed as a family member. She paused. Preston's wife, Genevieve Harrington. Maya set down her coffee. Genevieve, she said. Genevieve, not Preston directly, Genevieve. Diana's voice was precise. Whether that was Preston's structure or Genevieve's initiative, we don't know yet. But her name is on the trust documents. Maya thought about Genevieve at the will reading the engineered grief, the cold inventory look. She thought about Genevieve showing up at her apartment building. She thought about Genevieve's 3 days of silence after Preston withdrew the court contest, which she now reread in a different light entirely. Not grief, not anger, calculation, the specific quiet of someone deciding their next move. She came to my apartment, Maya said. So, yes. She wasn't coming for Preston. She was coming for herself. Maya thought through it quickly the way you think through a diagnosis symptoms first, then cause. She needed to know how much I knew, or she needed to offer me something, or both. What do you want to do? Diana asked. Maya thought about Silas in the dark at 3 in the morning, about holding his hand while he was afraid, not knowing what he was afraid of, thinking it was death, thinking it was pain, and now understanding that some part of it might have been this. The knowledge of what was happening under his own roof in his own company by his own son's wife while he was too sick and too broken to stop it. I want to report it, she said, everything, to the board and to the authorities, whatever process is appropriate. That means criminal exposure for Genevieve, possibly Preston. I know. Their children have a trust, Maya said. Silas made sure of that. That was his. That's staying. She was quiet for a moment. But what their parents did, that's not something I can look away from. Silas built that company over 40 years. He built it, and someone was hollowing it out while he was dying. Her voice was steady. She noticed that it was steady. I'm not looking away from that. Diana was quiet for a moment. All right, she said. Then we move. The board was called into emergency session 4 days later. Maya sat at the head of the table for the first time, not the end, where Howard Birch had been sitting, but the seat at the actual head, the seat that had been Silas's, the one that had presumably been empty since his death, while the board navigated who had the authority to occupy it. She occupied it. Barbara Cho was already seated when Maya came in. She looked at Maya in the chair, and something moved across her face, recognition maybe, or the kind of satisfaction that comes from watching something click into the shape it was always supposed to have. Diana presented the forensic findings. The forensic accountant presented the technical detail. The board's own legal counsel sat with an expression Maya had started to recognize as the look of someone receiving information that is clarifying something they had suspected but couldn't prove. Dale Preston's man said nothing for the first 40 minutes. Then he said, "How do we know this documentation is legitimate? It was found in an unlisted storage unit. A storage unit accessed with a key found in Silas Harrington's personal desk," Maya said. "A key that was in his possession at the time of his death. If the board would like to dispute the chain of custody, that will be a conversation for the authorities to have with you." Dale said nothing further. The board voted to refer the findings to the appropriate authorities unanimously. Even Dale ultimately raised his hand because the alternative was to vote against a referral in a room where everything was being documented and the majority shareholder was looking directly at you. After the vote, Barbara Cho waited until the room had cleared and then came to where Maya was stacking her folders. "Your father would have liked this," she said. Maya looked at her. "You knew him well." 20 years on this board, yes. Barbara smiled, not the careful smile of a professional setting, but something warmer. He was not always easy. He was stubborn. He was sometimes impossible, and he held grudges longer than was probably good for him. She paused. But he built something real. And he cared about it in the way that people care about things they built from nothing. She looked at Maya steadily. "I think you understand that kind of caring." Maya thought about the study, the key, the 12 boxes of evidence a dying man had preserved because he couldn't act and couldn't let it disappear. She thought about, "I am running out of time to be brave." "I'm learning to," she said. Genevieve was formally interviewed by authorities 8 days later. Maya was not in the room for that. She did not want to be. She had done what she could do, found the records reported, the findings answered every question the authorities and the board had asked, and the rest of it was no longer hers to manage. That was a distinction she had learned from nursing, knowing where your responsibility ended and someone else's began. Knowing when holding on became the problem instead of the solution. Preston called the house that evening. Gerald answered and came to the study where Maya was reading and said in his composed way that Mr. Preston Harrington was on the line and asked if Maya wished to take the call. She thought about it for 3 seconds. "Yes," she said. "Put him through." The line clicked. A long silence, the kind of silence that holds several things at once. "You found the records," Preston said. "Yes." "He left you the key." "He did." Another silence. She waited. "Did you know about Genevieve?" he asked. His voice was stripped of everything in the professional neutrality, the authority, the carefully modulated control. What was left was something raw. "Before the forensic report, did you know?" "No," she said. "I suspected something was wrong with the subsidiary accounts. I didn't know it led to Genevieve." A long pause. "Neither did I." His voice cracked slightly at the end of the sentence. Just slightly, just enough. "I want you to know that, whatever you think of me. I did not know." Maya sat with that. She was not entirely certain she believed him. She was not entirely certain she disbelieved him. Some things she was learning didn't resolve into clean certainties. They stayed complicated, stayed human the way real things did. "I believe you didn't know the specifics," she said carefully. But you looked the other way on a lot of things, Preston, for a long time. And looking the other way has a cost too." The silence stretched. "Yes," he said finally, quiet. "It does." She let that be enough. Good night, Preston, she said. She hung up, set the phone down, and sat for a long moment in the room that had been her father's and was now hers, the room where she had sat with him in the dark, without knowing why he was afraid, without knowing that she was the person he had been waiting his whole last chapter to be brave enough to find. Outside, the ordinary evening sounds continued, a car passing someone's voice down the street, the small, persistent sounds of a world that moved forward regardless. She picked up her book, she read, and for the first time since her name was called in a room full of people who thought they already knew her worth, she sat in the home that was hers, in the quiet that was hers, in the life that was finally completely, irreversibly hers. The shareholder meeting was announced on a Wednesday, not the emergency board session. This was the full annual meeting, the one that Silas had traditionally chaired every spring, the one that Harrington Industrial Holdings had quietly postponed twice since his death, while the legal situation sorted itself out. Now it was sorted. The transfer was complete. The forensic report was in the hands of the authorities. And the majority shareholder of Harrington Industrial Holdings was a woman named Maya Linwood, who had 6 weeks ago been sitting in a folding chair at the back of a room full of people who didn't know her name. Diana called the morning the announcement went out. How are you feeling? Like I'm about to walk into a room full of people who've read every headline about me for 6 weeks and formed opinions, Maya said. You've done that before. I had a folding chair last time. This time I have the majority stake. Yes, Diana said. Significantly different chair. Maya almost smiled. What do I need to know? The institutional shareholders are watching you carefully. They're not hostile, they're cautious, which is different. They want to know 2 things, whether you understand the business and whether you're going to make decisions based on emotion or strategy. Diana paused. The forensic situation with Genevieve has actually helped you here counterintuitively. The way you handled it methodically through proper channels without leaking to the press, read as professional restraint. People noticed that. I wasn't performing restraint, Maya said. I just didn't want it in the papers before it was done. I know, but the effect is the same. Another pause. Wear something that doesn't look like you're trying to prove anything. You don't need to prove anything anymore. Maya looked at the closet, at the navy blazer hanging where it always hung. I know what to wear, she said. Gerald drove her, he always drove her now, and she had stopped feeling strange about it, which itself felt like a kind of progress, the slow recalibration of what she was allowed to accept without apologizing for it. In the car, he said without looking away from the road, your father chaired his first shareholder meeting at 39. He told me once that he was so nervous, he wrote his opening remarks on his palm in pen in case he forgot. Maya looked at him. Gerald almost never volunteered information. Did it wash off? Halfway through the meeting, he had to improvise the rest. The slightest pause. He said it was the best meeting he ever ran. Maya looked at her own hands, clean. No notes. Thank you, Gerald, she said. Of course, he said, and pulled up to the building. Omomao! The meeting room held 43 people, not the intimate drama of the will reading, not the focused tension of the boardroom. This was larger, more formal, the particular atmosphere of institutional money-paying, careful attention. She recognized Barbara Cho in the 3rd row, Whitmore near the back, Howard Birch at the side table no longer acting chair, now simply a board member trying to determine which way the wind was blowing. Dale was not present. Dale had quietly resigned from the board 11 days ago, citing personal reasons, which everyone understood to mean something else entirely. Maya stood at the podium that had been her father's. She put her hands flat on its surface, felt the wood solid and real, and looked out at 43 people who were waiting to decide what they thought of her. My name is Maya Linwood, she said. Most of you know that already, and most of what you know came from a headline, which means most of what you know is partially wrong. A beat just long enough. I was a nurse for 15 years. I took care of Silas Harrington for 3 of those years. He was, as it turns out, my father, and he left me this company, and I intend to run it the way he built it, which is to say with the understanding that a company is only as good as what it actually does, not what it says it does. Silence. The good kind, the kind that was listening. I'm not going to stand here and tell you I know everything about this business. I don't. I've had 6 weeks of very good binder and approximately 40 hours of conversations with people who've spent decades here. What I know is enough to ask these right questions, and I've been told by more than one person in this room that asking the right questions is where everything starts. She looked across the room steadily. Silas Harrington built something real here. Someone tried to hollow it out while he was dying. That has been addressed, and it will not happen again. What happens next is the work, the actual work, the unglamorous daily work of making sure this company does what it was built to do. She paused one final time. I'm ready to do that work. I'd like to know if you're ready to do it with me. The room was quiet for 3 full seconds. Then Barbara Cho started clapping. It wasn't a standing ovation. It wasn't that kind of room. These were not that kind of people, but it was real. And it moved through the rows, and by the time it reached the back, even the cautious ones were joining it, because sometimes the right thing said in the right way simply compels people who are paying attention. Howard Birch Maya noticed clapped last, but he clapped. The Q&A lasted 40 minutes. The questions were sharp. Institutional shareholders did not ask soft questions, and she answered each one directly, and the 2 she couldn't answer, she said she couldn't answer yet, and told them when she expected to have the answer and who was working on getting it. Whitmore from the back row watched her with an expression she was coming to recognize as his version of approval, a very slight relaxation of his default precision, like a watch running 1 second less tightly wound. The hardest question came from a man she didn't recognize, 50s in a gray suit, who stood and said, Ms. Linwood, with respect, you have no background in corporate management. What makes you believe you're qualified to lead this company? The room went very still. Maya looked at him. She took her time. I spent 15 years making critical decisions about human beings under pressure with incomplete information in situations where the wrong call had permanent consequences. She said, I managed relationships between patients, families, medical teams, and institutions that each had competing interests and priorities. I learned how to find the truth in a situation when everyone involved had a reason to give me a partial version of it. She held his gaze. I would argue that's management experience. I'd also argue that the person who was formally qualified to run this company spent 3 years redirecting $4 million into his wife's trust account, which suggests that formal qualification is not the only variable worth considering. Someone in the 3rd row made a sound, definitely not a cough. The man in the gray suit sat down. He was almost smiling when he did it. After the meeting, Barbara Cho found her in the hallway. The man in the gray suit, Maya said before Barbara could speak. Who is he? Arthur Keene. He manages the 2nd largest institutional position in the company. Barbara paused. He asked that question to every new executive who stands at that podium. He asked it to Silas's first CFO. He asked it to the COO 3 years ago. What happens to the ones who don't answer it well? He sells his position within 90 days. Barbara looked at her. He has not taken out his phone since you sat down. Maya absorbed that. And the ones who do answer it well, he becomes their most reliable advocate. Barbara smiled, the warm one, not the professional one. I'd expect a call from him by end of week. Maya nodded. Then, because Barbara had been consistently quietly decent to her through all of this, she said, Can I ask you something? Of course. Did you know about me, about who I was to Silas? Barbara was quiet for a moment. I suspected, she said, not the specifics, but Silas talked about you not in meetings, not formally. In passing, in the small conversations you have with someone you've known for 20 years. He mentioned you more than a caregiver warranted. She paused. He had a way of talking about you like you were like he was proud, like he was describing something he'd had a hand in building. She met Maya's eyes. I didn't know for certain, but I wasn't entirely surprised. Maya pressed her lips together, held it together. She'd gotten better at that, at receiving the things she hadn't known she'd needed and not coming apart under the weight of them. Thank you, she said, for the seconding at the audit vote. I would have done it for Silas, Barbara said. I did it for you. Arthur King called on Friday. She had expected professional. He was, but underneath the professional was something more direct, a man who had done this long enough to dispense with certain unnecessary layers. I want to understand your 3-year plan, he said. Want the version for the press, the actual one. I don't have a 3-year plan yet, she said. I have 6 weeks of knowledge and a set of priorities. I'm not going to hand you a plan I made without enough information to make it well. A pause. What are your priorities? Stabilize the subsidiaries that were mismanaged. Commission a full independent audit, not just Meridian and Clearwater everything. Evaluate the executive team individually for whether they were complicit, negligent, or genuinely uninformed about what was happening. Keep the ones who were uninformed and good at their jobs. Address the others. She paused. And find out what Silas actually wanted this company to do in the next decade that he didn't get the chance to implement, because I've read enough of his private notes to know he had a direction in mind that nobody else was following. A longer pause. What kind of direction, Keen asked. He had notes on a community reinvestment initiative, manufacturing partnerships with 3 regional suppliers he'd been cultivating for 2 years, an employee ownership program he'd been quietly modeling. She had found those notes in a folder in the study desk behind the drawer where the key had been. She had read them twice. He was building towards something. I want to know what it was. Keen was quiet for a moment. When he spoke again, something in his voice had shifted the professional distance, compressing slightly, like a door opening a crack. He mentioned the employee program to me 18 months ago. I told him the board wasn't ready for it. Was he angry? He was disappointed, which with Silas was worse. A pause. Ms. Linwood, I'll be honest with you. I came into that meeting expecting to be underwhelmed. I was not. I could tell, she said. He laughed short, genuine. I'll call you next week. I'd like to continue this conversation. I'll be here, she said. She hung up and sat back in the study chair, her father's chair, her chair, and let the quiet sit with her for a moment. The good quiet, the quiet of something moving in the right direction. The call she hadn't expected came on a Sunday. Not from a lawyer, not from a board member, from a number she didn't recognize, and a voice she almost didn't place because she had only heard it once stripped of everything on the night Preston called about Genevieve. This is Preston, he said, unnecessary clarification she had known the moment he spoke. I'm sorry to call on a Sunday. It's all right. A silence. Then, Genevieve has retained separate counsel, where the situation between us is complicated. He didn't finish the sentence. She didn't need him to. I wanted you to know that I've instructed my attorney to cooperate fully with the financial investigation. Whatever documentation they need, they'll get it. Maya was quiet for a moment. Why are you telling me this? Because you could have made this worse, he said. At every point the will contest the forensic findings, the shareholder meeting, you could have made it significantly worse for me personally, and you didn't. His voice was careful, but the careful was different now than it had been at the will reading. Less armor, more effort. I don't know what to do with that exactly, but I wanted to acknowledge it. She thought about what Diana had said, don't let understanding someone make you protect them. She had not protected him. She had simply not used him as a weapon when she could have. There was a difference, and she understood it. Your children didn't choose any of this, she said. That mattered to me. I know. A beat. They'd like to meet you eventually. If this becomes something that he stopped. My daughter asked me if it was true that she had an aunt. Maya went very still. An aunt. Silas's grandchildren and Silas's daughter. The math was simple, and she hadn't let herself do it because there had been too many other things to hold, and this one had felt like something she wasn't ready for yet. What did you tell her? Maya asked. I told her it was complicated, he said. She told me that was a grown-up word for yes. Maya closed her eyes for a second, opened them. She sounds smart. She's 9, Preston said. They're terrifyingly smart at 9. Something in his voice shifted a texture she hadn't heard there before, something softer and more genuine than anything he'd said to her across a courtroom or a boardroom. She's also, for what it's worth, the image of her grandfather. Same eyes, same... He stopped. Same way of looking at you like you're being evaluated and found acceptable. Maya thought about Silas's eyes, about the way he looked at her in the mornings when she brought him coffee. That look she hadn't had words for, that she now understood had been something between love and guilt, and the specific ache of someone watching the thing they'd made without being able to claim it. Tell her, Maya said slowly, that it's complicated. But that complicated isn't the same as no. A long silence. Okay, Preston said, quietly. I will. She sat in the study for a long time after she hung up. The house was quiet around her. The house that had been strange to her for the first 2 weeks and was beginning in the way of things you live inside long enough to feel like hers. Not yet comfortable in the way that home feels comfortable, that would take longer, maybe much longer, but no longer foreign, no longer borrowed. She thought about the word aunt, about a 9-year-old who had her grandfather's eyes and the specific intelligence of children who have been paying close attention to the adult world and drawing their own conclusions. She thought about what it meant that Silas's grandchildren existed, that they were real people in her life now, whether she'd planned for it or not, that family complicated and perfect. Complicated again was assembling itself around her in ways she hadn't asked for and hadn't expected. She thought about her mother, about Catherine who had raised her alone without ever explaining why, who had offered only calm deflection when pressed, who had protected her daughter from a story that was not in the end protectable from, because stories don't stay buried when there's enough love behind them to eventually push them toward the surface. She thought about the letter. I love her. I should have said it to her face. She pulled open the desk drawer, the small one on the right empty, now the key long gone to its purpose, and she left it open for a moment looking at the nothing inside it. Then she closed it. She stood up, walked to the window. The evening was coming in the way it came this time of year, slow amber, the kind of light that makes everything look like it's been reconsidered. Her phone buzzed. Janelle, how did the shareholder meeting go? You've been suspiciously quiet. Either it went great or you're in jail. Please advise. Maya typed back, it went great, not in jail. Come for dinner Saturday. The response was immediate, obviously yes. Do you have a chef now? Please say yes. Maya looked around the kitchen. She was standing adjacent to the kitchen, where she had in fact met the cook. Gerald had quietly arranged a woman named Rosa, who had cooked for the house for 6 years and who had on Maya's first full day of residence, produced a breakfast so thorough it had briefly made Maya wonder if she had wandered into a different life by mistake. Yes, she typed. I have a chef. Her name is Rosa, and she will change your life. I'm already changed, Janelle wrote back. See you Saturday. She called Whitmore the next morning. Not for legal business. The legal business was largely resolved, the transfer complete, the ongoing forensic process in the hands of people whose job it was. She called because there was something she needed to ask, and he was the only person who could answer it. The employee ownership initiative, she said. Silas's notes on it. How far had he actually gotten? A pause. Further than he let on to the board. She heard papers moving. He'd had preliminary conversations with an employment law firm. He'd run basic financial modeling. He had a draft framework. More paper sounds. He also had a list. Of what? Employees, long tenured, people he'd been watching for years, people he believed had built significant value for the company and had never been given equity participation. Whitmore paused. He was going to present it to the board last spring. Then his health declined significantly and he didn't. Maya was quiet for a moment. Send me the list. I'll send it today. And the draft framework. That too. A pause. Maya, he would have done this if he'd had more time. I know, she said. That's why I'm doing it now. Wait. The list had 41 names on it. She read through it at the kitchen table while Rosa made coffee and pretended not to notice that Maya was reading something that clearly mattered, which was exactly the right kind of tact. She recognized 3 of the names from the board materials. She recognized Gerald's name third from the top, with a small notation in Silas's handwriting next to it that said simply, indispensable. She looked up. Gerald. He appeared in the doorway with the particular promptness of someone who had heard his name and was already on the way. Did you know, she said, that my father had you on a list? He looked at her for a moment. What kind of wetohen? The kind that was going to give you equity in this company. She turned the paper so he could see it. He had 41 names. Yours was third. Gerald looked at the paper. He looked at it for a long time, long enough that Rosa had finished making the coffee and set 2 cups on the table and quietly found somewhere else to be. He never mentioned it, Gerald said. His voice was composed as it always was, But there was something underneath the composure that she had never heard before. He didn't get to, she said, but I have his notes, and I'm intending to take it to the board. She paused. I wanted you to know. Gerald stood straight, pressed his lips together once, looked at her. Thank you, he said. It was 2 words, and it was the most she had ever heard him put into 2 words. He thought you were indispensable, she said. He was right. Gerald nodded once, the controlled nod of a man who had decided to hold himself together and was succeeding barely, and then he said, your coffee will get cold, and walked out of the room. Maya smiled at the table, at the list, at the cup of coffee Rosa had left. She drank it. The board approved the initiative 6 weeks later. Not unanimously, nothing was ever unanimous, and she had learned to not need it to be. 7-2 with Howard Birch in what she chose to read as a genuine turning point, voting in favor. Barbara Cho called her that evening. 7-2, she said. Silas would have gotten 5, maybe 6, if he'd lived to present it. He prepared the ground, Maya said. I just finished the harvest. That's a generous read. He was my father, Maya said. I'm allowed a generous read. Barbara laughed, the real one, warm and full. Yes, she said. I suppose you are. On the 3-month anniversary of the will reading, Maya did something she hadn't planned. She drove to the cemetery where Silas was buried alone, no Gerald her own car, the 10-year-old Honda that she still had not replaced because replacing it had not yet risen to the top of the list of things to do, and she sat on the bench near his grave for 45 minutes. She didn't bring flowers. She brought coffee, 2 cups, one for her, when she sat on the ground next to the headstone, which she was aware was not a rational thing to do, and which she did anyway because some things don't need to be rational to be true. She talked. She told him about the shareholder meeting and Arthur Keene and the 7-2 vote. She told him about Janelle coming for dinner and eating 3 helpings of Rosa's cooking and declaring that Maya's new life was an improvement on her old one in specific and practical ways. She told him about Preston's daughter and her grandmother's eyes and the word aunt, and how she was still working out what that meant and what she wanted it to mean. She told him she was still angry, that she thought about the 3 years of not knowing, of holding his hand in the dark, without knowing why she felt so specifically responsible for him, of caring for him with a thoroughness that she now understood had been about more than professional duty, and sometimes the anger was loud enough that she had to put it somewhere else for a while. She told him that was the honest version. She also told him, and this was the part she hadn't expected to say, hadn't known was true until it came out of her mouth in the quiet of that afternoon, that she understood. Not completely, not without reservation, but enough. She understood what it was to be afraid of the thing you wanted most. She understood the paralysis of believing that if you reach for it directly, you might destroy it. She had spent 34 years being careful with herself too, not asking for too much, not taking up too much space, making herself small and useful and unremarkable, in the hope that smallness would protect her from the specific pain of being fully seen and found insufficient. She understood. She didn't forgive him that morning. Forgiveness was something she suspected would arrive in its own time, at its own pace, without asking her permission. But she let go of something, some version of the anger that had been keeping her company as a substitute for the grief she hadn't fully let herself have. She sat with the grief for a while, then she picked up both coffee cups, walked back to her car, and drove home. Her home, her name on the deed, her father's desk in the study, and her books on the shelf, and Rosa's coffee in the kitchen, and Gerald's quiet competence in the driveway, and 41 names on a list that were about to change in the ways they'd already earned. Her life, entirely irrevocably, finally hers. She had walked into a room as a nurse in a folding chair and walked out as a daughter who had always been there waiting to be called by her right name. And when they finally called it, she had stood up. She had not sat back down.